All right, so probably the number one question that I get from agents that I coach is how do I handle a situation where a seller is saying to me, "Well, I've talked to so and so has said that they are going to list and sell my property for less than what it is that you're charging." For a lot of agents, whether they're new to the business or they're just untrained, they haven't been coached on how to handle this. This is a very difficult thing for them to handle. When I think about all the content that I have made regarding this topic, for sure, without a shadow of a doubt, this video I hope will end it all from the standpoint of it should be the last video that you need to help you handle this conversation with absolute confidence and conviction. All right. So I'm going to walk you through a framework that after I get through this, you won't fear this situation ever again. I promise you that. So let's jump into it. So we have to look at these concepts. And the first concept that we have to look at is this concept of perception. Now, I know you know what perception is, but in the context of this conversation, I think it's really, really important. On screen is probably one of the most popular images ever shown on the planet. And it's interesting because it's used in so many different ways. But when I think about perception, you see all of us right now looking at the screen see two different things while we're looking at the same picture. How can that be? Some of you looking at the screen right now see an old woman. Some of you look at the screen and say, "Old woman? I see a young woman. What are you talking about, Brandon?" And isn't that interesting? That is what I mean by perception. You see, sellers look at things multiple different ways, trying to differentiate the same information. I'm going to show you how this shows up in just a second. But this is a very, very powerful concept to understand if you're going to be able to handle this commission question. And it's not a commission question as much as it is, do you know how to deliver value? That's really what this entire thing is about. Because if people decide to do business with people that charge less than you, it wasn't because they charged less than you. It was because they didn't see the value in what it was that you would bring to the table. That is a perception that the seller had. The same perception that you may have right now when you look at the screen and you see the old lady, where other people look at the screen and they see the young lady. So let me explain to you how this works. All right. So what is the perception that most sellers have? Let's just be real honest. Well, number one, the perception that they have is that all agents are the same. In other words, the result the seller would get would be the same no matter who they hire. Now, they don't say that specifically, but they behave that way in how they communicate their perception to you. You see, when they say to you, "I've talked to so-and-so, and they said they would do it for less." Think about that for a second. I want you to think about what they said. Do it means every agent gets the same result no matter what. That's what they mean by do it. For less means that the second perception they have, therefore, if I, the seller, pays less in commission, as a result, I will keep and get more money. Do you see that perception and how strong that is? Now, I know you can read the words on the screen. I know you heard what I said, but do you really grasp this? Because it's really important for you to understand this perception in order for you to communicate to it. So by inverse communication means if somebody says one thing that they inversely, they're saying another. So when an agent or when a seller has a perception that if they pay less money to an agent, that they automatically means that that is better for them, What they are also saying at the exact same time is they believe, their perception is that no matter the agent they hire, that the result would be the same. So therefore, if I just pay less, I get more. Okay, you with me so far? Okay, so your first goal in handling this conversation must be to change that perception. Well, how do we do that? Well, let me introduce you to concept number 2, which is price is what you pay, value is what you get. And we all know that that famous quote has come from Warren Buffett. But what does it mean and how does it apply to this conversation when you're trying to explain and articulate your value? How do you actually do it? I'm so sick and tired of people saying, you got to provide value. You got to provide value. I get it. What does that mean? Can you give me some context of what that means? Well, I'm going to do that in this video. So concept number 2, let me give you an example and I'll ask you. All right. So concept number 2 is price is what you pay, value is what you get. So my question for you, if you're watching this on YouTube or if you're listening to this on the podcast, I want to ask you, which of the 2 examples has more value? Okay. Because remember, our first goal is to change someone's perception. All right. Example number 1. The cost, how much the thing cost, is $1. The result or the outcome is you lose $1,000. Okay, that's one example. Number 2, the cost of the thing is $1,000, and the result or the value is you make or you get $2,000 in return. So which one has more value? You're saying, well, duh, Brandon, number 2 has more value. Right. So price is just simply the amount that you pay. This is the first step to handling this perception or changing the perception. You see, in example number 1, the cost was lower, but even though the cost was just $1, $1 was too expensive. If it meant that you were going to lose $1,000, $1 is too expensive. You'd all agree, yeah? Hopefully every single one of you is like, yep, makes sense. $1 could be too expensive. Even though the cost is the perception of cost is low. And the opposite is also true. So in example 2, the cost, the perception of the cost is very high. 1,000 versus 1. If you just look at the cost, you would say, well, damn, the first thing seems better. It's a lot cheaper. This is what sellers do to you every single day. That's what they do to you, me, and every other realtor. They look at the cost. But in example 2, as a result of that $1,000 cost, you got $2,000 back in return. Every single person watching this video would do number 2. Now, you're like, I get it, dude. That's simple. That's not that impressive. Okay, let's take this even further. So let me introduce you to your new best friend, which is the list to sold price ratio. I'm going to get really, really specific now. All right. So I'm going to continue to share my screen and I want to show you guys something. All right. So I have pulled some listings, which is what you would do at a listing appointment. And you would start to show the seller this information to start to change their perception. Okay. So I pulled real listings that went on the market and sold from my MLS to illustrate this point. All right. So property number 1, it went on the market for $259,900, which if you're a coaching client of mine, you know that I hate that price and you know why when it comes to price bracketing theory. But anyway, this person obviously was not my coaching client, so they don't know. And they ended up selling it for $231,000. Okay, well, if we look at that list to sold price ratio, you would see right on screen that's circled, that is an 88% list to sold price ratio. That agent was able to produce the result of 88% of what they listed the home for. Okay, let's look at a couple more examples. Here's another example. Agent listed the home at $300,000, sold it at $278,000. That sold to price ratio was 92%. And I would show all these to the seller. Here's another example. Agent listed the home at $459,900, sold it at 335. That list to sold price ratio, 72%. Here's another one, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. This is another example of an agent who listed a house at $349,900, probably the worst listing price ever. That's a different video. And they ended up selling it at $272, which means that they got their client 77% of their asking price. Okay, well, what does that mean? Let's keep going. Let me show you one more. Here's another one, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. Agent listed the home at $539,000. They ended up selling it at $475,000. They were able to produce 88% as the result that they produced for their seller. And then lastly, here's another one. They listed at $599,900. Again, a really bad price. And they sold it at $525,000, which is 87% of their client's price. Now you say, okay, cool. I get it, Brandon. Tie this thing together for me. So as I'm talking to the seller, as I'm showing them this, I now show them, I don't tell them, I put real data right in front of their face. So I give them examples of real listings that sold. I just did it with you. And then I show them my results. And so here's a snapshot of a year to date. And you can see right now that my average sold list to sold price ratio is 100.23%. And if you were the seller, I would say, okay, now I want you to remember that. So if we look at where the result I produce for my clients on average, I'm showing, I'm not telling. On average, I'm getting my client their asking price or a little bit more on average versus the other agents that I just showed you. Now, watch this. So at the appointment, this is what I'm doing. I'm showing them, I'm not telling them. So I say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, let's just look at what this actually means for you. This is the same seller who said, well, Brandon, I love everything you have to offer, but little Johnny down the street is going to do it for 4.5% as an example. And I say, when I go through this and I say, okay, well, let's just look at this. If Johnny and I are both going to list the house at $300,000, it's not a question of $300,000. It's a question of how much we can sell the home for. In other words, who can put more money in your pocket? As an example, if the average agent, in this case, it's Johnny that you're interviewing, charges 4.5%, that's the cost. That's how much he charges for the services he provides, which is in fact lower than what I charge, which is why we're having this conversation. And as a result, he's able to produce on average, based on what I just showed you, the facts, the data, 89% on average. That means that he would be able to get you $267,000 for your home. This is real data from the MLS, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. This is what's really happening every single day. These are averages, okay? Well, what does that mean? That means the cost, what he charged you, 4.5%, would be $12,000. And the net, the value you would get, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, as a result of the cost you invested would be $254,000 for your house. And that is an option if you decide to do that, because price is what you pay, value is what you get. So the price Johnny is charging is 4.5%. The value that you get as a result of that is $254,000, as an example. Well, if we look at that and say, okay, here's another option. If you decided to hire me and I list the home at $300,000 and I charge you 6% to sell the house, and as a result, based on the real data as what I've shown you, these are real results with real clients that I'm getting right now, and I'm able to produce you a sales price of $303,000 based on what it is that I do versus what the other agent does, and I end up charging you $18,000 to do so, your net, or the value you get in exchange, is $284,000. So when we look at this, the question is this, Mrs. Seller: is the difference in cost of $6,000, which is I charge more than what Johnny's charging, worth an additional $30,000 more in your pocket? Now, every seller says, well, yeah, if I have to pay $6,000 more to get $30,000 more, that would be a great investment. So what I hear you saying, Mrs. Seller, is It's not how much you pay an agent that you're concerned with, but rather how much that agent can actually put in your pocket. Am I right? And this is where the magic comes in if you didn't get it. When I use this script, when we use neurolinguistics and we get the seller to say, well, you're right, we have successfully changed their perception. Do you see? Some of you have this huge aha, like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Some of you might have to watch this a couple times to really get it. But now I've successfully changed the client's perception that paying less doesn't equal better. That in fact, I've actually implanted a seed of doubt that hiring an agent who charges less actually might be worse for them because they're playing off past perceptions where the times where they have paid less for something and it cost them more. They went the cheap route and they wish they hadn't. They live in this world of resentment. This is the worldview now that we're playing because we're not competing on price, we're competing on value. If you compete on price, you will lose because there's always somebody who can do it for less. And so I'm encouraging you to acquire clients for their benefit, not just yours, in doing it under a relationship of value, the value you bring, the results you bring to your clients, not what you charge.